A Florida lawsuit says a man relied on ChatGPT for medical guidance and delayed urgent treatment until his condition became life-threatening. Courthouse News, Bankinfo Security, Reuters, and CBS News describe a court fight over whether OpenAI warned users clearly enough that a chatbot cannot replace a clinician. The practical issue is not just one bad answer. If the complaint survives, the record could define what health disclaimers, safety routing, and emergency prompts AI companies must build into consumer tools. The viewer checkpoint is the next court filing or hearing, where lawyers test what OpenAI knew, what the user saw on screen, and whether product warnings met a reasonable safety standard. Until a judge rules, treat the case as a documented allegation backed by multiple outlets, not a final finding about liability, but watch it because it may shape how medical risk conversations are handled by chatbots. Courthouse News gives the court setting, Bankinfo Security adds the product safety lens, while Reuters and CBS News make clear the alleged harm involved delayed medical care. Watch especially for whether OpenAI moves to dismiss the complaint or files a technical record describing how the model handled emergency symptoms. The added safety record to watch is a dated emergency triage exhibit, because that would show whether crisis language sent the user toward clinical care or kept the conversation inside the product. Washington and Riyadh have signed a civil nuclear cooperation framework that could help Saudi Arabia develop nuclear power while keeping enrichment and oversight questions unresolved. Reuters, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and NPR frame the deal as energy policy and Middle East diplomacy, because nuclear cooperation touches security commitments, Saudi fuel cycle ambitions, and regional non-proliferation rules. The immediate stakes are whether the agreement becomes a binding pathway with safeguards or remains a political marker before Congress, regulators, and inspectors weigh in. Viewers should watch for the next State Department text, Saudi statement, congressional reaction, or International Atomic Energy Agency language that clarifies inspections and fuel limits. The important point is that a headline about electricity also carries strategic weight for U.S.-Saudi relations, Israel and Iran calculations, and rules other countries cite when seeking nuclear technology. Reuters gives the diplomacy frame, The New York Times explains the Saudi power goal, while The Washington Post and NPR keep attention on enrichment limits. The next concrete test is whether lawmakers demand a Section 123-style review, public safeguards text, or conditions linking cooperation to regional security commitments. The Saudi side also has to show whether domestic power demand, desalination needs, and technology procurement can be separated from any future pressure for local fuel production. Congress timing matters here too. A U.S. judge has set a June 2027 trial date in the case involving Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, giving prosecutors and defense lawyers a long runway for filings. Reuters, Al Jazeera, The New York Times, and the Miami Herald point to the same procedural milestone, which matters because a date on the docket turns a headline dispute into motions, evidence fights, and jurisdiction arguments. The next record to watch is the court calendar. Discovery deadlines, pretrial motions, or any order that narrows the charges will tell viewers whether the case is moving normally or bogging down. The broader stakes sit between law and diplomacy, since Maduro's status and Venezuela's politics make every procedural move visible beyond the courthouse. For now, the reliable fact is the scheduled trial window, not any prediction about outcome, plea posture, or political fallout. Reuters supplies the docket date. Al Jazeera adds the Maduro family context, while the New York Times and Miami Herald keep the courtroom location and political stakes visible. A useful follow-up would be a scheduling order naming motion deadlines, evidence disputes, and any diplomatic request affecting custody or testimony. Lawyers also may fight over service, evidence access, and official status arguments, so the next dry procedural order could carry more practical meaning than public rhetoric. Those dates will drive strategy. President Trump is threatening a 100% tariff on imported generic drugs, raising a direct question about medicine prices and the low-cost supply chain. CBS News, CNBC, The New York Times, and Politico describe concern from health experts and manufacturers because generics depend on global production, thin margins, and predictable import rules. The practical impact turns on the written tariff order, which products count, whether exemptions protect essential medicines, and how quickly customs guidance reaches pharmacies, hospitals, and distributors. Viewers should watch for the next White House notice, Federal Register filing, industry response, or court challenge, because those records show whether the proposal becomes enforceable policy or negotiating pressure. The consequence is concrete. Broad duties without carve-outs could mean shortages or higher costs. Exemptions would make the announcement matter more as leverage over domestic manufacturing. CBS News captures the patient cost concern. CNBC follows manufacturers, while the New York Times and Politico track the White House policy path. A useful next record would name drug categories, country exemptions, implementation dates, and whether hospitals or wholesalers receive temporary protection from sudden price shocks. Hospitals, insurers, and pharmacy benefit managers will read the fine print closely because even a delayed tariff schedule can change contracts before patients see a price tag. The price signal could arrive early. Watch wholesalers. Texas police have arrested a close friend in a 14-year-old Arlington cold case after investigators used genetic genealogy and DNA evidence to revisit a killing. NBC News, CBS News, USA Today, and the New York Post described the arrest as the result of renewed forensic work rather than a routine witness break. The next checkpoint is the criminal court record. Probable cause filings, indictment steps, and defense motions will show what DNA source investigators used, how they linked it to the suspect, and whether a judge accepts that chain. The viewer checkpoint is, the story matters because genetic genealogy keeps changing old homicide investigations, but every case still has to prove collection, comparison, and custody in court. Until prosecutors present that evidence publicly, the arrest is a major development, not a conviction, and the safest follow-up is the next dated filing from police or the district attorney. NBC News gives the arrest headline. CBS News details genetic genealogy, while USA Today and the New York Post keep the long timeline in view. The next useful records are an indictment, a bond order, and any defense challenge to the DNA collection method or lab comparison. Prosecutors also have to connect the forensic lead to motive, opportunity, and admissible testimony, so early charging papers will matter more than retrospective headlines. Tropical Storm Bertha has made landfall in southern Louisiana, bringing dangerous winds, rain, and coastal flooding concerns to communities watching the Gulf. AP News, PBS, The Washington Times, and Times Daily report the landfall and immediate weather threat, while local emergency offices decide practical next steps for evacuations, roads, shelters, and power restoration. The important detail is timing. A tropical system can weaken after landfall but still create flash flooding, downed trees, and storm surge problems as bands move inland. Viewers should watch National Weather Service advisories, parish emergency notices, and utility outage maps rather than social media storm clips, because those official records show where danger remains active. The consequence is local and immediate. Travel decisions, school closures, rescue calls, and insurance claims all depend on the next rainfall totals and emergency management updates. AP News gives the landfall account. PBS extends the public service context, while the Washington Times and Times Daily keep regional impact on the map. A useful next record would name rainfall totals, damaged roads, shelter locations, and whether Louisiana parishes request state or federal assistance. If rain bans stall after landfall, the most important update may come from river gauges and parish road crews, not the storm's named status on a national map. Flood maps will change hourly. Louisiana officials may request federal aid soon. West Virginia has deployed the National Guard after flash floods inundated homes and businesses, turning severe weather into a search and rescue and recovery operation. AP News, CBS News, Click on Detroit, and the Transylvania Times report the deployment, heavy rainfall, and damage, while state officials decide where troops, high-water vehicles, shelters, and road crews are needed first. The practical question is not only how much rain fell but which communities remain cut off, which bridges or roads are unsafe, and whether more storms could slow rescues. Viewers should watch the governor's emergency briefings, county rescue updates, and National Weather Service flood statements for casualty counts, evacuation zones, and road closures. The story matters because Guard activation signals that local capacity may be stretched. The next official update will show whether the response is stabilizing neighborhoods or still expanding. AP News and CBS News give the statewide emergency frame. Click on Detroit and the Transylvania Times show how the flooding story spread beyond local outlets. A useful next record would identify deployed Guard units, rescue totals, closed roads, and whether federal disaster assistance is requested. The Transylvania Times reference matters because it shows regional spillover coverage, while AP News and CBS News remain the clearest sources for verified statewide emergency actions. Shelter demand will reveal pressure. The Transylvania Times adds regional context today. Oil prices are climbing after reports of a tanker strike off Saudi Arabia and renewed threats around Iran, putting shipping risk back into the market conversation. ISNA, Reuters, CNBC, and the Financial Times describe traders watching Middle East transit routes, especially when any threat near the Strait of Hormuz can quickly change risk premiums for crude. The key market question is whether the incident stays isolated or becomes a pattern that affects insurance costs, tanker routes, and refinery supply expectations. Viewers should watch the next shipping advisory, military statement, benchmark crude close, and company update from tanker operators, because those records separate market fear from confirmed disruption. The consequence reaches beyond oil desks. Sustained price moves can feed gasoline costs, airline expenses, inflation expectations, and central bank pressure if the security risk lasts. ISNA shows regional concern. Reuters follows crude pricing, while CNBC and the Financial Times connect tanker risk to global market expectations. A useful next record would be a verified ship operator statement, a naval command update, or a settlement price showing whether traders still price disruption risk. ISNA News Agency, Reuters, CNBC Top, and Financial Times should be read together here, since each outlet captures a different link between security warnings, trader behavior, and oil market pricing. Insurance data will confirm stress. Watch Brent. President Volodymyr Zelensky has fired the head of Ukraine's military, a leadership change as Kyiv manages battlefield pressure, Western support, and domestic expectations. The Hill, The Washington Post, NPR, and The Guardian describe the shakeup as politically significant because command changes can affect procurement priorities, accountability, and the tone of Ukraine's war strategy. The next concrete record is the appointment order, the replacement's first directive, and any defense ministry explanation of what operational problem the dismissal is meant to solve. Viewers should avoid reading the move as battlefield proof by itself. Evidence will come from later military statements, aid requests, and frontline reports. The stakes are high because allies want signs of discipline and effectiveness, while Ukrainians want leadership that can defend territory and sustain morale through another difficult phase. The Hill gives the personnel move. The Washington Post adds leadership context, while NPR and The Guardian keep allied and battlefield implications in view. A useful next record would name the successor's mandate, procurement changes, anti-corruption steps, and any response from Ukraine's Western military backers. If the new command team changes procurement or mobilization practice, the first proof should appear in written Ukrainian defense instructions instead of unattributed battlefield claims. Public orders will confirm intent. Official Ukrainian briefings should name accountability measures, logistics changes, and command priorities clearly. French authorities are investigating the death of Daniel Syed, a model scout reported to have connected young women to Jeffrey Epstein after he was found dead near Paris. The New York Times, CNN, The Guardian, and NBC News describe the case through confirmed reporting on his Epstein links, but the official French record is still the key source for cause, manner, and investigative status. The story matters because Epstein-related names carry public interest, yet a death investigation can be distorted quickly if rumor outruns documents. Viewers should watch for statements from French prosecutors, police, or a medical examiner, plus any court record that clarifies whether investigators see criminal conduct, suicide, accident, or an undetermined cause. Until those records appear, the responsible framing is narrow. Syed is dead, multiple outlets tie him to the Epstein network, and official findings must carry the next update. The New York Times gives the identity record. CNN, The Guardian, and NBC News connect Syed to the Epstein network without resolving the death inquiry. A useful next record would be a French prosecutor statement, autopsy language, or court filing that separates verified findings from speculation. Because the death occurred in France, the Paris area investigative file matters more than any U.S. political reaction, even though the Epstein connection explains why the case receives attention.